The sharp crack of a rifle shot echoed through the valley as Florence Jennings pressed herself against the stagecoach's dusty floorboards, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. This wasn't how her journey west was supposed to begin. But then again, nothing in the past year had gone according to plan. The year was 1871, and Florence had never imagined she'd find herself crossing the rugged terrain of the Wyoming Territory, headed toward a man she'd never met, a man who had essentially purchased her through an arrangement she hadn't consented to. At 22, she had become a commodity, a payment for her late father's gambling debts. "Stay down, miss," the driver shouted as another bullet splintered the wood near Florence's head. The other passengers, an elderly couple and a traveling salesman, huddled together on the opposite bench. The coach lurched violently as the horses picked up speed, bouncing its occupants mercilessly over the uneven trail. Florence clutched her small carpet bag to her chest, her knuckles white. Inside was everything she owned in the world: a spare dress, her mother's silver hairbrush, a daguerreotype of her parents, and the crumpled letter informing her that she would be traveling to Copper Creek to marry Silas Thornton, the man who held her father's debt notes. The stagecoach suddenly skidded to a halt, throwing Florence forward. Outside, men's voices shouted commands. "This ain't no robbery," a gruff voice called out. "We're just looking for the Jennings woman." Florence's blood ran cold. How did they know she was here? Had Thornton sent men to escort her the rest of the way? The coach door flew open, revealing a bearded man with a revolver. "Miss Jennings, you're coming with us now. Mr. Thornton don't trust you to arrive on your own." Before Florence could respond, another shot cracked through the air. The bearded man jerked backward, clutching his shoulder, his face twisted in pain and surprise. "That was a warning," a deep voice called from somewhere beyond the stagecoach. "The next one won't be." The injured man scrambled back to his horse, his companions already retreating. Within moments, the sound of galloping hooves faded into the distance. A tall figure approached the stagecoach, rifle in hand. The sun behind him cast his face in shadow, but Florence could see he wore a cowboy's wide-brimmed hat and a dusty duster that flapped in the breeze. "Everyone all right in there?" he asked, his voice gentler now. The driver called down, "Thanks to you, mister. That's the second time this month Thornton's men have caused trouble on this route." The man stepped closer, and Florence could finally see his face, sun-bronzed and weathered, with kind eyes that belied the dangerous precision of his shooting. He couldn't have been more than 30 years old. "Madam," he nodded to Florence, touching the brim of his hat. "I reckon you must be the one they are after." Florence straightened her back, determined not to appear as frightened as she felt. "I am Florence Jennings, yes, and you are Flynn Irvine." He holstered his weapon. "And I believe we need to talk before you continue on to Copper Creek." The stagecoach driver interrupted. "Mr. Irvine, we're already behind schedule. We need to make Copper Creek by nightfall." Flynn nodded. "My ranch is just over that ridge. I'll have her there safely by tomorrow and bring her into town myself." He looked at Florence. "That is, if the lady agrees." Every instinct told Florence to continue to Copper Creek, to face whatever fate awaited her there. But something in Flynn Irvine's steady gaze made her pause. This man had just saved her from Thornton's men. Perhaps he had information that could help her understand what she was walking into. "I'll go with Mr. Irvine," she decided, gathering her carpet bag. The driver looked dubious but eventually nodded. "Your choice, miss, but watch yourself. Thornton ain't a man to cross." With Flynn's assistance, Florence climbed down from the stagecoach. He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. As they rode away, Florence felt his steady presence at her back, a curious contrast to the uncertainty that had dominated her life since her father's death. "Mr. Irvine," she said after they had ridden in silence for several minutes, "I appreciate your intervention back there, but I must ask, why did you help me?" Flynn was quiet for a moment. "Let's just say Silas Thornton and I have history, and I wouldn't wish his company on anyone, especially not as a husband." "You know about the arrangement?" Florence asked, surprised. "Everyone in Copper Creek knows. Thornton's been bragging about his mail-order bride from back east for weeks." Says he got you as payment for some gambling debts. Florence winced at the bluntness of his words, but she couldn't deny their truth. My father lost everything before he died, our home, his business, our good name. Mr. Thornton sent word that if I didn't come west to marry him, he'd ensure my younger sister and mother were thrown into debtor's prison. Flynn's arms tightened almost imperceptibly around her as he guided the horse around a bend in the trail. Your father owed Thornton that much. Apparently, Florence sighed. Though I've never seen the actual debt notes, for all I know, Mr. Thornton could be lying about the amount. Knowing Thornton, that's likely, Flynn muttered. They crested a hill and Florence gasped at the sight before her. A modest but well-kept ranch spread across the valley below a sturdy main house, a barn, corrals filled with horses, and fields where cattle grazed. It wasn't grand, but it spoke of hard work and care. Welcome to Irvine Ranch, Flynn said, a note of pride in his voice. As they approached, a young man emerged from the barn, wiping his hands on a rag. He stared curiously at Florence. That's my foreman, Daniel, Flynn explained. He helps me run the place. Daniel approached as Flynn helped Florence dismount. Boss, we weren't expecting company. Daniel, this is Miss Florence Jennings. She's going to be our guest tonight. Flynn's tone brooked no argument. Miss Jennings, I'll have Daniel show you to the guest room where you can rest. We can talk more over supper. Florence followed Daniel into the ranch house, noting its simple but comfortable furnishings. The guest room was small but clean, with a patchwork quilt covering the bed and a basin of fresh water on the dresser. Left alone, Florence sat on the edge of the bed, trying to make sense of the day's events. She had left Philadelphia resigned to her fate, determined to honor her father's debts no matter the personal cost. But Flynn Irvine's intervention had disrupted that plan. What did he want? Why was he helping her? And why did she feel such inexplicable trust toward a man she'd just met? As the afternoon shadows lengthened, Florence washed her face and hands and tidied her travel-worn appearance as best she could. The smell of cooking food eventually drew her from the room. In the kitchen, Flynn stood at the stove, stirring something in a cast iron pot. He looked up when she entered, a slight smile softening his features. Hope you like beef stew, he said. It's about all I can cook that's fit for company. It smells wonderful, Florence replied, surprised to find a rancher doing the cooking himself. May I help? Flynn gestured to a loaf of bread on the counter. You could slice that if you don't mind. They worked in companionable silence for a few minutes, the domesticity of the scene striking Florence as oddly natural despite the circumstances. Mr. Irvine, she finally said, I appreciate your hospitality, but I must ask, what exactly are your intentions? Why bring me here instead of letting me continue to Copper Creek? Flynn set down his spoon and faced her directly. Because I know Silas Thornton better than most, and I couldn't in good conscience let you walk into that situation blind. He hesitated. Thornton is a cruel man, Miss Jennings. He's ruined half the businesses in Copper Creek through loans with impossible terms. He's driven 3 ranchers to suicide in the past 2 years alone. Florence felt the blood drain from her face. And you think he'd be cruel to a wife as well? His last wife died under suspicious circumstances, Flynn said grimly. The doctor called it an accident, but everyone knew she was covered in bruises most of their marriage. Horror washed over Florence. She sank into a kitchen chair, her legs suddenly unsteady. What am I to do? My mother and sister, I'll help you, Flynn said firmly. Tomorrow we'll ride into town together. I want to see those debt notes myself. If your father truly owed what Thornton claims, well, I've been saving to expand the ranch, but I'd rather use that money to pay off your father's debt. Florence stared at him in disbelief. Why would you do that for a stranger? Flynn turned back to the stove, his shoulders tense. Let's just say I have my reasons for wanting to thwart Thornton, and no woman should be forced into marriage, especially not to a man like him. They ate supper with Daniel, who kept the conversation light with stories about the ranch's daily operations. Florence found herself laughing despite her worries, particularly at tales of a stubborn bull named Hector who had developed an unusual fondness for Flynn's hat. After Daniel excused himself for the evening, Flynn poured 2 cups of coffee and led Florence to sit on the porch. The Wyoming sunset painted the sky in brilliant oranges and pinks, while crickets began their evening chorus. "It's beautiful here," Florence murmured, sipping her coffee. Flynn nodded. "My father claimed this land when I was just a boy, said a man could breathe out here, truly breathe." He glanced at her. "What about you? What's your story beyond your father's debts?" Florence hadn't expected the question. Most men she'd known weren't interested in women's stories. "I was a teacher in Philadelphia," she said. "I taught at a small school for girls. I loved it, opening young minds to literature, mathematics, history." "You miss it," Flynn observed, "very much." Florence wrapped her hands around her cup, drawing comfort from its warmth. "My father was a good man, Mr. Irvine, before the gambling took hold of him. After my mother fell ill 3 years ago, something broke in him. He started visiting card rooms, convinced he could win enough to pay for better doctors. And instead lost everything," Flynn finished softly. Florence nodded. "He died of a heart attack 6 months ago, the same day he received a letter from Mr. Thornton demanding payment. My mother never fully recovered from her illness, and my sister is only 16. I'm all they have." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of Florence's situation hanging between them. "Get some rest, Miss Jennings," Flynn finally said. "Tomorrow will be a challenging day." Morning brought clear skies and a renewed sense of purpose. Florence dressed in her best and only spare dress, a serviceable navy blue cotton that had seen better days. When she emerged from the guest room, Flynn was waiting, freshly shaved and wearing a clean shirt under his usual vest and duster. "You look ready for battle," he commented with a hint of a smile. "In a way, I suppose I am," Florence replied, attempting to match his light tone despite her nerves. The ride to Copper Creek took just over an hour. As they approached the town, Florence observed the typical frontier settlement, a main street lined with wooden buildings, including a general store, saloon, small bank, and various other businesses. What caught her attention was how many storefronts stood empty, their windows dusty and signs faded. "Thornton's work?" she asked quietly. Flynn nodded grimly. "He owns more than half the town now." They dismounted in front of a substantial 2-story building with a sign reading Thornton Investments and Loans. Flynn offered Florence his arm, which she gratefully accepted, drawing strength from his steady presence. The clerk at the front desk startled when they entered. "Mr. Irvine, we weren't. That is, Mr. Thornton isn't expecting you." "But I believe he is expecting Miss Jennings," Flynn replied coolly. "Please inform him we'd like to see him immediately." The clerk scurried upstairs, returning moments later looking flustered. "Mr. Thornton will see you now." They were led to a lavishly appointed office where a man rose from behind a massive desk. Silas Thornton was older than Florence had imagined, at least 50, with graying hair and a substantial paunch straining against his expensive waistcoat. His smile didn't reach his cold eyes. "Miss Jennings, at last," he said, ignoring Flynn completely. "I was beginning to think you'd failed to honor your father's obligations." Florence straightened her spine. "Mr. Thornton, I've come to discuss those very obligations." Thornton's gaze flicked to Flynn, his expression hardening. "Irvine, I might have known you'd stick your nose where it doesn't belong. This is a private matter between Miss Jennings and myself." "Actually," Flynn said calmly, "Miss Jennings has asked me to represent her interests in this matter. We'd like to see the debt notes you claim her father signed." Thornton's face flushed with anger. "There's nothing to discuss. Her father lost a considerable sum to me, $5,000 to be exact. The agreement was clear: either the debt is paid in full or Miss Jennings fulfills the alternative arrangement." "Show us the documentation," Flynn insisted. With obvious reluctance, Thornton unlocked a drawer and removed several papers, which he spread across the desk. Florence leaned forward to examine them, her heart sinking. There was indeed her father's signature on multiple promissory notes, the total adding up to the amount Thornton had stated. "As you can see," Thornton said smugly, "everything is in order. The marriage contract is already drawn up as well." He produced another document. "All that's needed is Miss Jennings' signature, and we can proceed with the ceremony today." Florence felt dizzy. The room seemed to close in around her. $5,000 might as well have been $1 million. She had no hope of ever acquiring such a sum. Flynn, however, remained unruffled. And if the debt were to be paid in full today, would Miss Jennings be released from this arrangement? Thornton laughed. You don't have that kind of money, Irvine. Answer the question, Flynn said, his voice deceptively quiet. Something in his tone made Thornton pause. Well, yes. If the full amount were paid, the contract would be void. But Flynn reached into his coat and withdrew a bank draft. $5,000 payable to you. I believe that settles Mr. Jennings' debt in full, Florence gasped. Thornton snatched the bank draft, examining it carefully, his face cycling through shock, disbelief, and finally tightly controlled fury. This appears to be in order, he admitted through gritted teeth. But Miss Jennings should know what she's giving up. My home is the finest in the territory. As my wife, she would want for nothing. Except freedom, Flynn replied. He turned to Florence. Miss Jennings came west to honor her father's debt, not to be bartered like cattle. I'm setting her free myself. Thornton's face contorted with rage. You've always been a thorn in my side, Irvine. First you refused to sell your land, and now this. You'll regret making an enemy of me. Flynn remained impassive. Mark the debt paid, Thornton, and provide us with a receipt and release of all claims against the Jennings family. Fuming, Thornton scrawled across the debt notes and wrote out a receipt, practically throwing the paper at them. Take it and get out, both of you. Outside, Florence stood on the boardwalk in stunned silence. Flynn had just spent his life savings money intended for expanding his ranch to free her from an obligation she hadn't even chosen. Mr. Irvine, she finally managed, I don't know how to thank you, what you did in there. Don't thank me yet, Flynn said, guiding her down the street. We still need to figure out your next steps. Do you have enough money to return east? The question caught Florence off guard. She hadn't considered what would happen after confronting Thornton. I know I don't. The journey here took nearly everything I had. Flynn nodded as if he'd expected this answer. Then let me make a proposal. I need a teacher. A teacher? For the children at nearby ranches and farms. They have no school to attend. The closest is in Laramie, too far for daily travel. I've been thinking of converting one of the outbuildings into a schoolhouse. Hope fluttered in Florence's chest. You'd pay me to teach, a fair salary, plus room and board at the ranch until you decide what you want to do long term. Flynn's expression was earnest. No strings attached, Miss Jennings. You'd be free to leave whenever you choose. Florence studied his face, searching for any hint of deception or ulterior motive. She found none, only sincere concern and perhaps something else, something warmer that made her pulse quicken slightly. Why are you doing all this? She asked softly. Flynn was quiet for a moment. 15 years ago, my mother was in a situation much like yours. A man held debts over our family, tried to force her into an arrangement. No one stood up for her. His jaw tightened. I was too young to help her then. I'm not too young now. The simple honesty of his explanation touched Florence deeply. What happened to your mother? She took her own life rather than submit. Flynn's voice was flat, controlled, but Florence could hear the old pain beneath it. My father never forgave himself for not finding another way. He worked himself into an early grave trying to pay off those debts and keep this ranch. Florence placed her hand gently on his arm. I'm so sorry, Mr. Irvine. Flynn covered her hand with his own, the brief touch sending warmth through her. So you see, I couldn't stand by and watch history repeat itself, but I promise you the teaching position is genuine. The children around here need education. Then I accept, Florence said, surprising herself with how right the decision felt. I would be honored to teach your community's children, Mr. Irvine. A genuine smile transformed Flynn's face, making him appear younger and unburdened. Good, that's good. He cleared his throat. Now, shall we see about getting supplies for your schoolhouse? If we're starting a school, we'll need books, slates, chalk. They spent the rest of the day in Copper Creek, purchasing supplies and sending telegrams, one to Florence's mother explaining the change in circumstances, and another to the bank in Philadelphia arranging for her mother and sister to receive regular payments from Flynn's account. You don't need to do that, Florence protested when she realized what he was doing. You came west to support them. Flynn replied simply. "I won't have them suffering while you help build something important here." By the time they rode back to the ranch, loaded with supplies and Florence's future suddenly reimagined, the sun was beginning to set once again. Florence found herself studying Flynn's profile as he rode beside her, wondering at the twist of fate that had brought her into the path of such a man. Over the following weeks, Florence threw herself into establishing the school. Word spread quickly among the scattered homesteads and ranches, and soon 12 children of various ages were enrolled to begin lessons once the converted storehouse was ready. Flynn worked alongside his ranch hands to transform the building, adding windows for light, a proper heating stove for the coming winter, and sturdy desks fashioned by the local carpenter. Florence was touched by how he consulted her on every decision, valuing her expertise and preferences. Each evening, they would share supper and then sit on the porch, discussing the day's progress and planning for the school's future. Sometimes Daniel or the other hands would join them, but Florence found she most treasured the evenings when it was just the two of them, talking long into the night. Flynn was unlike any man she had known in Philadelphia. He was straightforward yet considerate, strong yet gentle in his manner. He listened when she spoke, truly listened, and sought her opinions on matters beyond the schoolhouse. Florence began to notice how her heart beat faster when he entered a room, how she found reasons to seek his company, how his rare, full smiles made her feel warm to her core. But she carefully guarded these feelings, uncertain if they could be reciprocated. The school opened on a bright October morning with all 12 students and their families gathered for the occasion. Florence, dressed in her best, stood nervously before the assembled community, suddenly aware of the responsibility she'd undertaken. Flynn stepped forward, addressing the group. "Folks, I want to thank you for trusting us with your children's education. Miss Jennings comes to us from Philadelphia, where she was a highly respected teacher. We're fortunate to have her skills here in Copper Creek." As he spoke, his gaze met Florence's with such evident pride that she felt herself blushing. The parents nodded approvingly, several mothers coming forward to introduce themselves and their children personally. That evening, after the excitement of the first day had settled, Flynn and Florence sat in their usual places on the porch. The air had turned cooler, and Flynn had thoughtfully brought out a blanket for her shoulders. "You were magnificent today," he said quietly. "Those children already adore you," Florence smiled. "They're eager to learn, that makes teaching a joy." Flynn seemed to be gathering his thoughts, uncharacteristically hesitant. "Florence," he finally said, using her given name for the first time, "these past weeks have been different." "Good different," her heart began to race at his tone. "They have been for me as well. When I intervened that day on the stagecoach, I had no idea how much my life was about to change." Flynn turned to face her fully. "I thought I was helping you, but the truth is, you've brought something to this ranch, to my life, that I didn't even know was missing." Florence held her breath, hardly daring to believe what she was hearing. "I know you came west under difficult circumstances," Flynn continued. "And I promised you freedom with no obligations. I stand by that promise." He took a deep breath. "But I find myself hoping that you might choose to stay, not just as our teacher, but perhaps as something more." "Flynn," she whispered, her voice catching. "I'm not Thornton," he said quickly. "I'm not trying to trap you or claim you, I just—" He ran a hand through his hair, looking endearingly uncertain. "I'm trying to say that I've fallen in love with you, Florence Jennings, and if you could see your way to giving me a chance to court you properly." Florence didn't let him finish. Acting on impulse, she leaned forward and pressed her lips gently to his, a brief, sweet contact that nevertheless sent her heart soaring. When she pulled back, Flynn looked stunned, then broke into a radiant smile. "I'll take that as encouraging," he murmured. "I never expected to find love here," Florence admitted. "I came west resigned to a life without choice, but you gave me back my freedom, and in doing so, gave me the chance to choose my own path." She reached for his hand. "And I choose you, Flynn Irvine. I love you too." Flynn's expression was one of wonder as he carefully drew her into his arms. This time their kiss was deeper, a promise of the future they might build together. Spring 1872 brought renewal to the Wyoming Territory. The school flourished, with 5 additional students joining as word of Florence's teaching spread. Flynn's ranch prospered as well, though he had to work harder to compensate for the money he'd given to Thornton. On a perfect May afternoon, Florence stood in the small church in Copper Creek, wearing a simple but elegant white dress that the women of the community had helped her make. She carried wildflowers picked that morning, and her sister, who had traveled west with their mother for the occasion, adjusted her veil one last time. "He's a good man," her mother whispered, squeezing Florence's hand. "Your father would have approved." When the doors opened and Florence walked down the aisle, she saw only Flynn waiting for her, his expression one of absolute joy and devotion. The man who had set her free had, in turn, captured her heart completely. Judge Samuel Porter, who had come from Laramie for the occasion, smiled at the couple before him. "Rarely have I seen 2 people more clearly meant for each other," he said warmly. "This union was not arranged by debt or obligation, but by choice and love, the only foundation that truly matters." As they exchanged vows, Florence thought of how differently things might have gone had Flynn not intervened that day on the stagecoach. Instead of being trapped in a loveless marriage with Thornton, she had found true partnership with a man who valued her mind, her independence, and her heart. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the judge declared. "You may kiss your bride." Flynn gently lifted her veil, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "My Florence," he whispered before bringing his lips to hers as the church erupted in cheers. The celebration afterward was a true community affair, with tables laden with food contributed by every family, music from local fiddle players, and dancing that continued well into the evening. As twilight painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Flynn led Florence away from the festivities to a quiet spot overlooking the town. "Happy, Mrs. Irvine?" he asked, his arm around her waist. "More than I ever imagined possible," she replied, leaning into his embrace. From mail-order bride to beloved wife, quite the journey. Flynn's expression grew serious. "I've been thinking about what Thornton tried to do to you and to others. There are likely more women out there in similar situations." Florence nodded. "Too many women with too few choices." "I was thinking," Flynn continued, "once the school is firmly established, perhaps we could help in other ways. Use some of the ranch profits to create a fund for women looking to escape bad situations or start fresh." Florence's heart swelled with love for this man who continued to surprise her with his compassion. "A chance for others to find the freedom you gave me, freedom to choose their own path," Flynn agreed, "just as you chose me." "The best choice I ever made," Florence said, rising on tiptoes to kiss him as the first stars appeared in the Wyoming sky. 5 years later, Flynn and Florence Irvine stood on the porch of their expanded ranch house, watching their 3-year-old daughter chase fireflies in the gathering dusk while their infant son slept in Florence's arms. The school had grown into a proper building in town, with Florence still teaching alongside 2 additional teachers. The Irvine Freedom Fund had already helped 17 women start new lives, and Flynn had recently been elected to the territorial legislature, where he advocated for women's property rights and educational opportunities. Silas Thornton had eventually overreached, his business practices finally drawing the attention of federal authorities. He now resided in prison back east, his hold on Copper Creek broken. "Did you ever imagine this?" Flynn asked softly, his arm around his wife's shoulders as they watched their daughter's delighted laughter. "That day when I said I'd set you free," Florence smiled up at the man who had saved her in every way a person could be saved. "I didn't dare imagine it. But I'm grateful every day that you had the courage to intervene, to offer a different path." "Best decision I ever made," Flynn replied, bending to kiss her tenderly. In the fading light of day, surrounded by the family and life they had built together, Florence knew the truth of his words. What had begun as an act of compassion, a stranger's determination to set a trapped woman free, had blossomed into a love deeper and truer than either of them could have dreamed possible on that dusty Wyoming road 5 years before.